And right now then I would like to invite Mr. Ulrich Leberle from CEPI for a presentation about the European Commission proposal on circular economy package. So there it is, that's how it works, so forward and backward. Here you are. And here's your microphone. I think I'll give you this one. This one is probably better.
Right. Good morning. My name is Ulrich Leberle, working on raw materials in the Confederation of European Paper Industries. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to the organizers for the flexibility of moving this part of the conference into the morning. But tomorrow there will be another meeting with members of the parliament in Brussels, and due to the German strike I didn't have another opportunity to get back to Brussels, so thanks a lot. I'd like to respond as well a little bit on the proposals or on the analysis from Beata, from the previous speaker, and lay down the views of the European paper industry on this circular economy proposal and the legislative proposals. First of all, also the paper recycling, where we are today. We then targets are certainly one of the main issues that will be discussed between Parliament and the Member States in the coming months. We have heard a little bit on the methods, how to calculate input method, output method, where is the basis? Is it the waste that is put on that is generated, or is it the materials that are put on the market? We need to talk about definitions. What is recycling, and we have clear ideas on this as well. And then some proposals also from the paper industry on additional measures that are needed to go towards the targets of this circular economy communication. The package is a non-legislative communications package, but then we have more relevant proposals for the paper industries, and that's the legislative proposal. So amendments to the Waste Framework Directive. That's the directive where the waste hierarchy is embedded, where there's the definitions on recycling, and then the packaging directive, where we have the targets for the different packaging materials to be recycled, and the waste review is looking at increasing those targets. And then finally the landfill directive is another legislative piece that needs to be amended according to the Commission. This is an overview of the targets that would be relevant for the paper industry. So we've spoken a lot on separate collection, and there is actually from the Waste Directive from 2008 a separate collection target for paper, plastics, metals and glass that should be separately collected by 2015. There is no additional provisions in the new proposals on this, because there is this assumption that this separate collection will take place in 2015. But we know that in a lot of circumstances this is not actually being implemented as it was intended, namely that those materials are collected separately from each other and not only separately from the residual waste. Then the municipal waste target, so mainly household waste recycling, 50% by 2020, with the proposal to increase that by 25. This is relevant, of course, for the paper industry, because a relevant fraction of that municipal waste is actually paper. And then in the blue boxes, you see the packaging, the paper packaging targets that are proposed by the Commission, 85% in 2020 and 90% in 25. Furthermore, in that package, we have a proposal for a harmonized definition of municipal waste that I'd like to comment about, and also a harmonized calculation method of recycling rates. Today, there are 4 methods to measure recycling rates, and member states have used that possibility. So, where the recycling rates are measured, whether it is the packaging placed on the market or the waste generated, makes a big difference, of course, and makes comparing rates between member states tricky. The monitoring and third-party verification was already mentioned, and then finally the Commission is also proposing minimum requirements for extended producer responsibility, also there to harmonize the way extended producer responsibility schemes work, since they work very differently in the country. Generally, from CEPI's point of view, we need also to keep in mind that we have a new Commission. Since yesterday, we have a Polish head of the European Council. We have new members in the Parliament, and there is this drive to be bigger on big things and maybe smaller and more modest on small things. And there is an agenda to look really, to review and have a refit program of what legislation is really needed for the competitiveness of European industry. Which is welcome by industry, but we think that on this topic, resource efficiency and the circular economy, we also believe that this is an important one if it is well done for ensuring the competitiveness of the European paper industry and be more resource efficient with our raw materials. But it should be further improved so that it is actually a circular economy package that is helpful for European industry. Because raw materials are one of the major costs in the industry. So let's discuss it further, and the Parliament and the Council is just doing that now. Paper recycling, these are figures from the ERPC, the European Recovered Paper Council. We see that we are already at very high figures on paper recycling. Close to 72% are recycled. It has increased a lot over the past, and of course, as we go to such high levels, it becomes more and more tricky to go even further, although we know that there is still a lot of potential. We also need to keep in mind that 70% is not 70 out of 100. The full potential is not 100, but around 80. So we are closer to the potential than this graph might suggest, because there are papers that are not recyclable or not collectible. We can, and that was already mentioned as well, the paper fiber can be recycled a lot of times, and it is today already. If you translate those rates, it is recycled 3.5 times already in Europe, thanks to the recycling in the paper industry. We have heard about decreasing paper consumption, mainly in the graphic sector, and if you put the recycling next to the paper consumption, we can see that the paper consumption has decreased while recycling has still improved, and since 15 years recycling has improved by the factor 1.5, so by 50%. But we have regional differences. We have countries, and those figures are just the number of paper mills in the country. So to show that proximity recycling is possible, there is paper mills using paper for recycling in all the countries. But we have countries that have already reached recycling rates of more than 70%, while we have other countries that are still below 60%. And we have heard in the case of Poland, it has been improving quite well from a low level in recent years. And so the figures from 2012 were already outdated today. But yeah, in the global picture, so we have about half of the countries that are below 60% and half that are above 70%, which leads to a good average, but still potential in some circumstances. And I think the focus needs to be also there and help bring those recycling rates up. Therefore, if we look at the proposal of the targets, we think that they need to be ambitious to further improve the collection, but they also should be kept realistic, and rather than going from 80% to 85, look rather at what is bringing those that are under the average to where we are today. So as CEPI, we propose that a 80% paper packaging recycling target should be a target for 2020, and as a minimum target in all the member states, and not as an average target, but that this should be a minimum to be achieved. And then for 25 and 30, define targets for those periods once we know how it is possible to go towards the 2020 target. What is also important to note is that we think it is necessary that there is no discrimination between the different packaging materials, and mainly the consumer packaging materials should be brought to comparable levels. Otherwise, it might happen that paper recycling is discriminated in the collection scheme, since it is already performing well, while others are not performing well. So I think all materials should meet their targets, and the targets should be comparable. On the calculation method, we think that you have raised, the Commission is proposing an output method, so actually looking at what is in the recycled product rather than what waste materials go into a product. And we think that this focus of high quality recycling is a right approach, but we think that in case of paper, we would advocate to keep an input method, but to have the final recycling very clear. So it's really the input to the final recycling process. And for that, we also think that here we should reference to European standards rather than to a strict, unflexible 2% rate, which is maybe not working for all materials, but rather in the case of paper, we have the EN 643 that was already described today, where different grades have different levels of non-paper components that are tolerated in those grades. And if a material meets EN 643 standard, then it can be assumed to be counting towards recycling target. And we think that should be also valid for exports, so that indeed to prevent what you were going to say, that then if we just look at targets, we might just then export more material because we collect low quality material that actually cannot be used in the paper industry or in other recycling industries and are exported. So we think that this compliance with the EN 643 standard should also apply for exports. On the calculation of the recycling rate, we think it's absolutely needed to be able to compare the performance between recycling systems and the member states better. If we look at the recycling rate for paper and board packaging here, we see that the 2008 target has been achieved in really almost all states, and are actually at one could say surprisingly high levels. But if we look at the data for the treatment of municipal waste, we see that some of the countries that have a very high packaging recycling rate here actually also say that out of the municipal waste, 80% is landfilled. So it doesn't really fit together, and that is only possible if a country has this opportunity to measure input to a collection process with the output of the collection process. Then of course you get very high recycling rates, but it doesn't mean you'd really divert from the landfill. And for that, improvement on definitions is needed. In the waste directive, we feel that the definition of recycling is too wide. Recycling is anything from pre-processing here until the final processing in the paper mill, and we therefore think that there needs to be a precise definition of what is the final recycling, because the Commission has introduced final recycling as the step where the quality decides whether input or output is needed, and therefore this final recycling really needs to be well defined. And in the case of paper, we see the final recycling as the processing in an industrial process that then generates a product that is comparable to the virgin material based product and doesn't include also pre-processing steps. We also think that the complementary measures are needed because yes, landfill ban and ambitious but realistic recycling targets, but we think what's missing is more stringent requirements on the separate collection to really explain what was meant with separate collection. And here I've seen a nice picture when going through the city of Krakow yesterday, which I didn't include in this presentation. I planned doing that on the lunch break. But where there are the bins with paper being separately from metal plastics and the other fractions, while in other circumstances we often see that only recycling, which is any kind of materials, and the residual waste is being called separately collection, and that was not the intention. And we also see that in conferences often there is the question of the cost of setting up separate collection systems or more sophisticated separate collection systems. But we strongly believe that these investment costs are then paying off rather quickly with the improved quality of the material that generates more sales revenues. On the topic of collection, I just want to mention the commitment from the paper industry called Impact, where we really go and talk about separate collection in circumstances where levels are still low or where commingled collection systems are predominant, to really improve the understanding of the economics also of separate collection systems. I've just quickly mentioned the landfill ban. We also think that in addition to the landfill ban, which is of course necessary, And good in the Commission proposal, we also need incineration restrictions, because otherwise we believe that material that cannot go to landfill is then just moved one step higher in the waste hierarchy and doesn't reach recycling. On extended producer responsibility, the proposal by the Commission is setting minimum requirements for schemes, because they are performing very differently in member states. We have producer responsibility schemes that are perceived of being very costly to the industry, but are not transparent enough so that those that pay for those schemes actually have a say in how collection schemes are set up. And therefore we believe minimum requirements are the right step, but we still also think that the consideration of the sales of the material needs to be taken into account when we talk about the cost of those systems. And how it's written now in the Commission proposal says that the schemes need to cover the full cost of the collection, which of course bears the risk then that if the full cost is covered, then municipalities might go into inefficient collection systems, because the cost is anyway covered by the extended producer responsibility scheme, and that doesn't contribute to a cost-effective collection systems. We also believe that here the Commission is going too much into secondary legislation on changing minimum requirements. We think it's essential enough so that the full legislative process needs to be applied when renewing. And I'd like to close with another aspect that goes more into the general picture of the circular economy communication, which is that renewability is actually not addressed in that package, and it should be, because that is how nature deals with circularity, and looking already before at the life cycle, before the products get on the market. And we think renewability needs to be addressed in the circular economy package as well. And with that, I think it has been short enough. I don't need to go through another set of conclusions, and I'm looking forward to the discussions on maybe on both the speeches now on this regulatory framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. So, any questions? Anyone would like to start the discussion? Oh, brilliant. I will go with the microphone to you.
Thank you. My name is Michiel Adriaanse, representing the Dutch Competence Center Paper and Board. Thanks, Ulrich, for this overview. I have three questions. The first is, you describe more or less a plateau in what we think is being recyclable as fiber products. What we see, at least in the Netherlands, is 2 or 3 products we thought of non-recyclable are entering the recycling chain. The first is reclaimed fibers from municipal wastewater treatment plants, so the former, say, toilet paper fibers, but also diapers being recycled more and more. What's CEPI's vision on these? Should we ban them or welcome them to reach a higher degree of recyclability? And the same is more or less true if we look downstream, that a lot of paper mills are applying active components as surface treatment to have additional aspects in the paper product, as barrier coatings, for instance. These compounds will enter the recycling loop and also end up somewhere. Is there any sort of idea of these components? And the last question is, can you go back to the World Economic Forum project together with Ellen MacArthur Foundation Project Mainstream, and what's that about? How does this influence the topic you're talking about?
On the first question, I think it's very interesting to follow the research that is being done in recycling and making a good use of the products or the parts of products that we didn't consider to be right for recycling. And of course there is a lot of research going on, and CEPI is also supporting that to go even further with the recycling of the recycling residues and so on. The Refiber project, I think, will have very good results out of that. On hygienic questions, I think one just needs to be very careful not to let those kinds of products into the general recycling loops, but look there at rather closed loop systems, so that concerns that people might have on hygienic issues are really can really be shown that this is not entering the general recycling loop, where we have a European market for material, but look rather there at closed loop systems and prepare for the future. And that is also part of what we say, that let's be a bit cautious with formulating targets in 2030, because development is there to go into further use of those materials. So I think you had the two options. I would say embrace it rather than blocking that development. Definitely. The project Mainstream, CEPI is indeed involved in a project together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and McKinsey, and that project is looking at optimizing recycling streams, and paper has been identified as, they called it, the golden oldies. So a material that is already recycled at a high degree, and how to even accelerate those recycling streams with the proximity principles is very exciting project that we are involved, and that should show results within 1 year. And then the second question was? Yeah, you mean what's... I think it's very much linked to the response to the first question. So of course, if we go into more complex products that are not that where fiber is one, but then there are other materials, let's really expand and look into how to best use those materials that are part of the future paper making processes, and use them the best possible as a raw material again as well. Indeed, so let's embrace them rather than blocking them, but making sure they are entering the recycling loop where it's hygienic and where it doesn't put at risk other easy to recycle materials. Then thank you very much. If there's no further questions.
Any more questions? Okay, so if not, thank you very much, Ulrich. Here's a little EcoPaperLoop gift for you. Thank you.